When this veteran sang his soul-stirring tribute to fallen soldiers, Donald Trump's shocking reaction left the entire audience stunned. The ballroom shimmered under the golden hue of crystal chandeliers, casting a soft light over a sea of high-profile guests. The annual Freedom and Honor Gala, held at the prestigious Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Los Angeles, had drawn politicians, celebrities, and business leaders, all gathered to support wounded veterans. Servers moved gracefully between tables, refilling champagne glasses as hushed conversations filled the air. Before we dive in, dear souls, God is with those who watch this video all the way through and take in the lessons we need to learn. Don't worry, He is merciful, and by bringing this video to you, He's showing that He still cares about you. I'd like to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to our channel, and if you enjoy this video, please consider liking and sharing it. May God bless all those who support us, and may He continue to guide us in spreading kindness and hope. Let's continue. At the head of the room, a long, elevated stage, framed by deep blue velvet curtains, stood as the highlight of the evening. A massive American flag hung proudly in the background, its stars catching the light each time the fabric fluttered slightly from the air vents above. President Donald Trump, seated at the front table, adjusted his cufflinks as he listened to the evening's MC, a retired four-star general, recounting stories of resilience from soldiers who had sacrificed more than most could imagine. Trump, known for his commanding presence, sat with an air of attentiveness, but beneath that, something flickered in his expression, a rare moment of quiet contemplation. As the speeches continued, guests applauded politely, offering smiles and nods at the right moments, but there was a certain routine predictability to it all. They had attended galas before, heard stirring speeches, donated generous checks, and gone home feeling like they had done their part. Then, a pause. The MC cleared his throat, scanning the room before speaking. "Tonight," he said, voice thick with emotion, "we have a very special guest, a man who has seen more than most of us could ever imagine and lived to tell about it." The shift in energy was immediate. Conversations halted, glasses were placed back onto the linen-draped tables. Even Trump leaned forward slightly, his attention sharpening. The general continued, "Sergeant Lucas Barrett served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan.
He was awarded the Purple Heart for injuries sustained during an ambush outside Kandahar. But what he's about to share with us tonight goes beyond the battlefield. Please give a warm welcome to a true American hero." Polite applause rippled across the room as a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s walked toward the stage. His limp was slight but noticeable. The crisp navy blue suit he wore couldn't quite hide. The stiffness in his movements a reminder of the injuries that had nearly taken his life. Lucas Barrett stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and adjusted the mic stand with a steady hand. He scanned the room, taking in the crowd, powerful men and women, some of whom had sent soldiers like him into war. Then, after a deep breath, he began to speak. But no one was prepared for what would happen next. For a brief moment, silence settled over the room. It wasn't the kind of awkward quiet that comes with uncertainty. It was something heavier: anticipation, the kind that made people sit a little straighter, lean in a little closer. Lucas Barrett let the quiet linger. He wasn't the kind of man to rush his words. Years of service had taught him that the weight of a message wasn't in how fast it was delivered, but in how deeply it was felt. He adjusted the microphone again, his fingers brushing against the cold metal pole. His gaze flicked over the crowd: senators, CEOs, Hollywood elites before, landing on President Trump, who was watching him closely. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," Lucas said finally, his voice even, steady. "I know these kinds of events are about raising money, showing support, standing behind the men and women who serve this nation, but I also know that for a lot of people, it's easy to forget what that really means." The room remained quiet. He exhaled slowly. "I don't say that with bitterness," he continued. "I say it because I've been there. I've seen what war does to men. I've seen what it steals from them. I've seen the ones who never came home, and for a long time, I didn't know how to carry that. But one night, in a hospital bed, with more broken bones than I could count, and a future that felt uncertain at best, I did the only thing I could do." He paused, glancing down at his hands. When he looked up again, something shifted in his expression. "I wrote a song." A murmur rippled through the audience, not because they doubted him, but because no one had expected it. "It's not a song about me," he clarified, shaking his head. "It's about the ones who never got the chance to stand on a stage like this, the ones who never made it past 21, the ones who fought alongside me, but never got to come home." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, creased piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, the kind of paper that had been unfolded and refolded countless times. I wrote this for them, and tonight I want to share it with you." He nodded toward the pianist in the corner of the room. The soft, mournful notes of a single piano chord filled the air. Lucas closed his eyes, took a breath, and began to sing. But within seconds, the entire room would be fighting back tears. The first notes of Lucas Barrett's voice carried through the ballroom. Deep and steady, yet laced with something that made people hold their breath. It wasn't just the melody, it was the weight behind it. The last note hung in the air, fading into a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, applause, not polite clapping, not the kind of applause given out of obligation at fancy galas. This was different. It was raw, it was real, it was loud. People rose to their feet, some clapping, others wiping away silent tears. A few simply stood there, hands pressed together in front of them, as if they were still absorbing what they had just heard. But, amidst the ovation, one man remained seated. President Trump hadn't moved, his hands still clasped together, tightened slightly. His gaze lingered on Lucas, not just watching him, but studying him. Then slowly, he stood. But what he did next would leave the entire room speechless. The applause thundered through the ballroom, but President Trump didn't acknowledge it right away. He remained still, his hands unfolding slowly as he exhaled, his gaze never leaving Lucas Barrett. Then he stood up, not with the quick rehearsed movements of a politician acknowledging a moment, but with deliberate, measured steps, the kind of movement that carried weight, the kind that signaled something profound. The room watched, holding its collective breath as Trump took a step toward the stage. His face wasn't the one people were used to seeing at rallies or press conferences. There was no broad grin, no nods of recognition to the cameras. His expression was serious, somber. Even Lucas Barrett, still standing at the microphone, met his gaze for a moment. Neither man spoke. The cameras in the room clicked, flashes capturing the scene as the President of the United States walked up the steps and approached the soldier. Then he did something no one expected. Trump extended his hand. Lucas hesitated just for a second before grasping it. The handshake was firm, lingering. It wasn't just a photo op moment, it was something unspoken, something understood only by men who knew what duty looked like. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, Trump placed his other hand on Lucas's shoulder. A hushed stillness fell over the room. The cameras kept rolling, but no one moved, no one spoke. Finally, Trump leaned in slightly, speaking just loud enough for the microphone to catch his words. "They'll never be forgotten." Lucas swallowed hard, his grip tightening for a brief second before he nodded, not out of formality, but out of respect. Trump let go, then turned back, toward the audience. His expression had shifted again, not softened exactly, but more reflective, more thoughtful. Then he clapped, and within seconds, the entire room erupted again, louder than before. But this wasn't just for Lucas anymore. It wasn't just for the song, it was for every soldier who never got to stand on that stage. And what happened next would ensure that this moment wouldn't just be remembered, it would be talked about across the entire nation. The event should have moved on. The next speaker should have taken the stage, and the gala should have continued as planned. But this wasn't just another moment. As Lucas stepped down from the stage, he felt a firm hand on his arm. Trump wasn't done talking. "Walk with me," the president said, voice low but steady. Lucas hesitated for only a second before nodding. The two men moved toward the edge of the ballroom, away from the cameras, away from the prepared speeches and scripted formalities. A small group of aides and Secret Service agents hovered nearby, but this was a conversation that needed no audience. Trump turned to him, eyes sharper now, focused. "That song," he said, pausing, "that wasn't just music. That was..." He stopped, shaking his head slightly, as if searching for the right words. Lucas nodded, his voice calm. It was the reality. Trump let out a breath, studying him. "I've met a lot of veterans, heard a lot of stories, but I've never heard it put like that." He paused. "You served in Afghanistan." Lucas shifted slightly, feeling the weight of memories press against his chest. "Yes, sir, 2 tours. First time I left, I was 22. Second time," he trailed off. Trump gave a small nod. "And that's when you got hit." Lucas didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." A beat of silence passed. "Do you still talk to any of the men from your unit?" Trump asked. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly. "The ones who made it home, yes," then softer. "Too many didn't." The weight of the words hung between them. Trump exhaled. "You know, I get criticized a lot. People say I don't understand the military, that I don't feel what they feel. Maybe they're right." He glanced at Lucas. "But I listen. And tonight, I heard you." Lucas studied him for a long moment. He wasn't sure what to say to that. Trump continued. "This song, this story, people need to hear it. Not just in this room, not just tonight." He straightened, glancing toward one of his aides. "Get this out there. Make sure every veteran in this country hears this." Lucas blinked. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was something bigger. Within hours, clips of the performance flooded the internet. The video spread across social media, news stations, and morning talk shows. Some headlines called it a powerful tribute. Others called it a rare emotional moment for a president often seen as unshakable. But the real impact wasn't in the headlines, it was in the emails and messages Lucas received from soldiers he had never met, from Gold Star families who had lost their sons and daughters, from veterans who felt invisible until now. It was in the phone calls from men he had served, with voices thick with emotion saying, "I needed to hear that." It was in the way one song managed to do what years of speeches couldn't: remind the world of the faces behind the sacrifice. But there was still one more thing Lucas needed to do. The days following the gala were a blur. Lucas Barrett had never been one for attention, yet his phone wouldn't stop buzzing veterans, families of fallen soldiers, strangers who had never set foot in a war zone, but felt the weight of his words. The video of his performance had spread beyond anything he had imagined. Talk shows debated it, news anchors analyzed it, but none of that mattered to Lucas. What mattered were the voices on the other end of the calls. A man from Oklahoma who had lost his younger brother in Afghanistan, a woman from Texas who had served but never felt seen, a father from Ohio who had folded a flag over the coffin of his only son. Every message carried the same theme: thank you for saying what we couldn't. And yet, amidst the flood of messages, one stood out. It wasn't from a journalist or a politician. It was from a woman named Marjorie Tillman, the mother of Private Jason Tillman, a young soldier from Lucas's unit who hadn't made it home. Lucas read her words over and over. "I never got to hear my son's voice again, but last night I heard it in your song." His hands trembled slightly as he typed back, "He's never been forgotten." And that was when Lucas knew. This wasn't the end of something. This was the beginning. He took a deep breath, looking out at the California sunset from his small apartment. The war had taken a lot from him, but it had also left him with something he never realized he carried: the responsibility to keep telling their stories. The next morning, he called the number that had been left in his inbox. Not a media request, not a politician, but a small nonprofit that helped veterans tell their stories through music. And just like that, one song turned into a movement. Because the truth is, no soldier is ever truly gone, as long as their story is told. There are moments in life that remind us what really matters. Moments that cut through the chaos, the politics, the separations, and remind us of the people behind the headlines. Lucas Barrett's story wasn't just about a song. It was about duty, sacrifice, the cost of freedom, and maybe, just maybe, it was about reminding the world that some voices, no matter how silent, deserve to be heard. As Lucas stood on the edge of his balcony, the weight of the past few days felt both surreal and heavy. The phone calls, the messages, the flood of emotions from strangers and comrades alike, they all felt like pieces of something larger, something he wasn't quite prepared for. But the overwhelming truth was clear now. His song, his story, had sparked something in others. It was no longer just his burden to carry. It had become a collective truth, a shared understanding, a promise that the voices of those who had sacrificed would never be forgotten. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. The California sunset was something Lucas had never truly appreciated before, too consumed by the shadows of war to notice the beauty in everyday life. Now, as he stood in the silence of his small apartment, that sunset felt like a quiet acknowledgement from the world, as though it was giving him permission to take the next step, to share what he had kept locked away for so long. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was another message, this one from a woman named Ella McAllister, a mother whose son had perished in the same unit as Lucas. He had known Ella from his time in Afghanistan, though they had never been close. Her message, though, was simple and to the point, yet it held a depth of understanding that only those who had lost could truly grasp. "I heard your song, Lucas. I heard him in it, thank you." Lucas read the message twice, then a third time. He couldn't help but close his eyes, feeling the weight of Ella's words. She wasn't the only one who had found solace in his song. There were so many others who had lost more than just a son, a brother, a friend. They had lost pieces of themselves, pieces that had never been able to heal. Until now, he leaned against the balcony railing, the cool breeze brushing against his face, his mind racing with the possibilities. The nonprofit had already reached out again, eager to discuss the next steps. What was he supposed to do now? He had shared his pain, his truth, and it had resonated with so many. But he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to be done. More voices waiting to be heard, more stories begging to be shared. A car honked in the distance, but Lucas barely registered the noise. His mind was elsewhere. He thought back to the gala, the moment when he had stepped onto that stage and poured his heart into that song. He hadn't expected anything in returns, certainly not the tidal wave of support and recognition that had followed. But there was something deeper happening now, something he hadn't fully understood until this very moment. The song wasn't just about honoring the fallen, it was a reminder to the living, to those who had fought and struggled, who still carried the weight of war on their shoulders. He reached for his phone and called the nonprofit again, this time with a clearer sense of purpose. "Lucas Barrett," the voice on the other end answered, as always polite, professional. "It's me," Lucas said, his voice steady. Let's move forward. Let's take this song, this story, and make sure it reaches every corner of this country. We're not done here. There was a brief pause before the voice replied, "You sure you're ready for this, Lucas?" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I've been ready." And so it began. What had started as a simple moment of vulnerability on stage had grown into something much larger. It was no longer just Lucas Barrett's personal journey, it was a movement to ensure that no soldier, no matter their story, would ever fade into the background again. A movement to make sure that every sacrifice was recognized, every voice heard. As the days turned into weeks, the campaign took shape. It wasn't easy. There were challenges, there were obstacles, but there was something undeniable driving them forward. Lucas spent hours in meetings, sometimes with strangers, sometimes with men who had shared the same experiences in war. He had never been a man of many words, but he found that his story had a power he hadn't realized. It wasn't about him anymore, it was about the men and women who had stood beside him, the ones who hadn't made it home, and the ones who would continue to fight long after the battle had ended. By the time the next video was posted, a week later, Lucas was no longer just a former soldier. He had become the face of a movement, a voice for the voiceless, a symbol for all those who had ever felt unseen. The video, once again, went viral. The message was clear. This wasn't about politics. This wasn't about division. It was about unity, about coming together as a country to acknowledge the cost of freedom, the price of sacrifice, and the importance of remembering those who had given everything for a cause greater than themselves. One particular email stood out among the rest. It was from a young soldier who had just returned from deployment. His message was short, but it resonated with Lucas deeply. "I didn't think anyone cared, until I saw your song. Now I know I'm not alone." Lucas read the email again, and for the first time in days, he felt the weight of the past few months lift off his shoulders. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about this moment, this movement, and the lives it was touching. He had no way of knowing what would come next, no way of knowing how far this journey would take him. But one thing was certain. Lucas Barrett was no longer just a man with a story to tell. He was a man leading a charge, ensuring that no voice would ever be silenced again. And as the movement grew, so did the strength of the song. To all the precious and dear souls who have watched this video until the end, in this story, if you believe in honoring those who have served, consider supporting veteran organizations that help our heroes transition back to civilian life. Every story matters. Every voice counts. Just as God brought this video to you today. Don't be discouraged. God has not forgotten you, and He wants you to learn from these stories. Never forget the power of giving, and share this video with all your loved ones, so we can continue spreading inspiration together. Please like the video, leave a comment, and support us by subscribing to our channel. May God bless and protect you all. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.